Okay, this is our scheduling lesson. So first of all, why do we do schedules in a construction project? Well, there's a lot of reasons. The first would be we need to specify all the activities that need to get done. And before you start, it's nice to get your brain wrapped around all of that. Then we need to figure out the sequence of events. Now, there's very typical sequences that we go through, but every project's unique, so we need to figure that out. We also need to look at durations to figure out each activity, how long it's going to take. And then we figure out how all these activities are dependent on each other, which ones we can do concurrently, which ones need to be finished before we can start the next, for example. Then at that point, we can start to figure out responsibilities, assigning subcontractors to do the work. The general contractor would assign people in-house to manage the work, and we start to get a team together to tackle the project. We also build schedules to minimize delays. So if we know we have something finishing on Tuesday, then we can start the next activity on Wednesday, and we don't need to figure that out on the spot. We can look into the future and do that. It also establishes really clear communication between all the parties, the owner, the general contractor, the subs, the design team. And we usually publish schedules at the very beginning. That's called the baseline schedule. And then we update those through the course of the project, usually monthly. A schedule also tells us, is this a feasible project? So oftentimes as a general contractor, we would commit to finishing within a year. Then we would go and build the schedule, and it got really scary that we weren't going to make it. And so then we figured out we had to work overtime or multiple shifts, and we would determine if the feasibility was what we thought it would be. And oftentimes, again, we commit and then we figure that out later, unfortunately. We can also figure out cash flow. So if you put a dollar amount to the schedule, you can see as soon as something's completed, we have to have X amount of money to keep moving. This is good for a loan, for example, so the bank can understand how much cash flow they need to provide to the owner every given month. And lastly, long lead time. So what that means is if we have material that takes forever to get, to manufacture, to fabricate, we can start to look ahead, and we do that through the schedule. So air handlers, for example, precast concrete, for example, those are items that might take 18 weeks, 20 weeks. And so we need to get on that way early, or we're going to be in a world of hurt when it's time to install those things and it's not on site. Okay, some keys to success in scheduling. First one is to start building your schedule right away. So you're able to build a schedule without having the details. So any given office, we could build a generic schedule from the earthwork, utilities, foundations, superstructure, enclosure, MEP systems, finishes. We could come up with some pretty good ideas of durations and sequence just based on the type of building and the size. Make assumptions based on fact. So we know in this class we're in Colorado, so there are going to be certain days that we just can't work in the winter, or we just can't work in May when it's raining every day. So understanding the weather and being smart about that and predicting days that we can't work makes our schedule more useful. Work days. So in most cases we don't work Sundays, and more we're starting to call Saturday a work day, unfortunately. So understanding whether it's a 5-day or a 6-day typical work week is also important. The labor pool. So if we say we can get 3,000 people on this job site and there's just not enough labor to do it, that makes our schedule useless. So we need to understand the trades and their availability. So making assumptions based on fact will turn our schedule into something that we can really use. KISS, K-I-S-S, keep it simple, stupid. So that's a term that we threw around quite a bit, and in particular we told our scheduler this, who would bring us these big fat schedules that were hundreds of pages long, and we would intentionally drop them right in the trash right in front of him. And that's because we're jerks on construction sites, but it was useless. He got down to so much detail that as soon as he published it, life changed out in the field and it wasn't accurate anymore. So it's nice to get down to some detail, but once you get past a certain point, the minutia is just too much for a schedule. So there's a balance there, and a scheduler learns that over time. Getting subs involved. So it's nice to get the experts involved, the people who are actually building the job. So they have a lot of good input into the sequence, the duration, and the activities. And then lastly, field input. So if you're a general contractor and you're a project manager building the schedule, get some help from foremen and superintendents who are the ones who actually build things. So oftentimes the PM can do quite well with the schedule, but the details from the field are really important. Okay, in the field, on a real job site, we use software, Microsoft Project or Primavera P6. And you'll learn about that if you continue in construction when you go through our PM1 course. But for this class, we're going to do this by hand. And I like to do this because it really shows you the basics, and then schedules make a whole lot of sense after this. So when you do this by hand, our particular method is called activity on node. There's some nomenclature we have to establish up front. So there'll be a series of boxes or nodes. And in each box, we have some sort of identification, a letter or a number, or the name of the activity. In the top left, we have early start. This is the earliest possible time the activity can start. Early finish, this is the earliest possible date the activity can finish. And late start, you're starting to see a pattern here. This is the latest we can possibly the latest we can possibly start, and late finish, the latest we can possibly finish. Then in the bottom center, we put our duration for that activity. Okay, so how do you figure out your duration? Well, that's based on experience, going to your field people and saying, how long does it take to pour X number of cubic yards of concrete? Or you go through RS means, for example, or some database that tells you your productivity. So if you know you have a 100 cubic yard pour, then you can look and see how long that took in the past and figure out your duration for that pour. Duration should be no less than 1 day. So if you say it's a 6-hour duration, and then you try to squeeze in 2 hours at the end of the day, it's just not going to happen with that next trade. The next trade is going to show up the next day. So good rule of thumb is to have duration at least 1 whole day. Okay, here's our example. This is a lot to look at, but I suggest you pull down the scheduling example from D2L. So all of this is listed there. What we're doing is building your dream job, which is a 7-Eleven. And we have activities A through R already established, and we're going to build a schedule to see how long it's going to take and to understand some other characteristics of the job. So on the left are the steps we need to go through. First of all, determining all the activities, and I've done that for you. Now, this is really basic. A big schedule would have thousands of activities on a big job, but this will give us the feel for a schedule. Number 2, determine the sequence of the activities. And I've done that in this precedence column. So when you see activity B, site excavation and utilities, over on the right it says precedence. Activity B cannot happen until A is complete. So it's a finish to start relationship. Mobilize first, then I can do site excavation. So that's what the precedence column is. So for example, this one that says E, F, and G, I cannot place or cure concrete until E, F, and G are done. I cannot place or cure concrete until the slab prep's done, plumbing's done, electrical's done, which makes sense, okay? So that was number 2. Number 3, determine the duration for each activity. I just talked about how that comes together. So I've done that already for this. Then number 4, build a network diagram. So let's start with that. Now at this point, you should be downloading this scheduling example so you can refer to it off to the side. Okay, so we're going to start from the top. So our first activity is mobilize. So I suggest you get a piece of paper, turn it on its side, and run through this with me. If not, at the end, try to do it yourself, because it'll make sense as I'm talking, but it really sinks in when you do it yourself. Okay, so A, mobilize. B, if we look in the precedence column, B cannot happen until A is complete. So we indicate that here. Duration of 13. Then C cannot happen until B is complete. And that's in that precedence column again. Duration of 6. Then here's where we diverge a little bit. So D cannot happen until A is complete. Landscaping can't happen until we mobilize. So this falls off the typical path, and we're down below with 8 days duration. By the way, normally this is in days when you see duration. Your group project, for example, you may consider using hours, but in a normal construction project, days is the duration. Okay, E can't happen until C is complete. F can't happen until B is complete, so we're starting to get jumbled up here a little bit. G can't happen until B is complete. So this was our stub in plumbing and stub in electrical. And this was the example we just talked about, where H, placing or curing the concrete, can't happen until E, F, and G are complete. I, J, K, all in line, then L diverges a bit. This is plumbing rough-in. And then M, gypsum board, can't happen until we have K, which is electrical, and L in place, which is plumbing. Makes sense. Then after M, we have N, which would be our roof trusses, and the roof truss can't go on until we have our exterior structure and interior studs in. Then roofing after our roof truss. Paint after our gypsum board. And finishes. Now we're almost at the very end, and we need to wrap everything up in project closeout. So R can't happen until O, Q, and D are complete. Okay, the first activity and the last activity are the only activities that don't have a predecessor and a successor. All the other activities do need a predecessor and successor. So if we forgot to grab D down here at the bottom, then that's not correct. Everything needs to wrap up and tie to the last activity. Okay, so that was step 4 on your sheet. We did our network diagram. Now we need to do a forward pass to determine the early starts and early finishes for each activity. So that means we start on the far left, and we start with the end of day 0. Always start with the end of day 0. That's a common mistake. You'll want to start with 1. We start at the end of day 0. Okay, 0 plus 1, our duration. A can finish at the end of day 1. So that was 0 plus our duration equals our early finish. Okay, so then moving over to B, if we can finish A at the end of day 0, then we can start B at the end of day 1. Let's keep moving through it. So B, 1 plus a duration of 13, our early finish is 14. Then we move over. C, early start of 14, early finish of 20. Let's move up. F, early start of 14, duration of 4, early finish of 18. G, 14 early start, 18 early finish. Let's move down to E. Move down to D. 1 for D is the early start, 9 would be the early finish. Now let's go up to E. 20 and 27. So H is where it gets a little more complicated. So what is the earliest possible time we can start H? Well, H needs all the previous activities done before it can start. So we could have started on 18, but E wasn't complete yet. E's not complete until 27, so that's the driver. So H cannot start until day 27. Then 31. Uh-oh. Then 31. 31, 32, 32, 42. Okay, then 42 distributes to the next three activities. 42, 45, 42, 47, 42, 46. Okay, then we move to M. Again, we had to wait for both activities to finish, K and L, and the driver there is 47. You have to take the higher of the numbers. 47, 55, let's move up to O, 45, 51, down to P, 55, 59, 59, 62, and then R, we have three options here, 51, 62, or 9. We'll take the higher again. It needs to wait for all of them to be complete. 62, 63. Okay, so what that means is our duration is at least 63 days. Now, I might trick you and say, here are all the durations. What is the total? And if you just add up all the durations on your sheet, you forgot that we could overlap activities and run things concurrently. So you have to build a network diagram to figure out your total duration. So in this case, this is a 63-day duration. And I always ask the class, how many months is this? And everyone says 2 months because there's 30 days in a month. Well, there's 20 work days in a month. So this is a 3-month duration, assuming we work 5 days a week and going back to all those assumptions I talked about earlier. Okay, so that was step 5 and step 6. Now we'll do a backwards pass, which is step 7. So if you look in the far right, we're going to move from right to left. So the latest I can finish is 63. The latest I can start is 62. So 63 minus 1 is 62. The latest I can finish Q is 62. I pull that over from R. And 62 minus 3 is 59. Okay, you're going to see a pattern which is quite easy for the next few. Okay, so now the decision is, on L, is the latest finish 47 or is it 46? Well, if M can start at 47, then L could finish at 47. So 47 gets pulled down. So the late start of M is our late finish of L. 47, 43. Okay, back to K. 47 pulls through, 42. Up to O, 62 pulls through from R. So the latest I can possibly finish O is 62, and then I'm in line with R, and I haven't delayed R in any way. 62, 56, 56, 53. Okay, so J is our biggest decision yet. So what is the latest J can finish if I have 3 activities afterwards? Well, it's 42, because if I finish any later than that, I've delayed N, I've delayed K, and I've delayed L. All right, so I need to pull the lowest number from late start to my new late finish, which would be 42, the lowest number. 42, 32, 32, 31, 31, 27. Okay, 27 gets pulled through, 20, 20, 14. Now let's move up. 27 gets pulled through. That's the lowest number, right? Well, it's the only number, 27 from H. 23, 27, 23. Okay, let's go to B. 14, that would be the lowest of C, F, and G. That's the latest I can possibly finish B without delaying the next activities. 14 minus 13 is 1. Go down to D. We pull 62 over and subtract 8. We get 54. And 1 and 0. We pull the lowest number to create our late finish. Okay, That was our backward pass. And this determined our late finish and late starts for each activity. Now you're starting to see a pattern here. So some of these activities have the same late start as early start. Some of them have different. So what that is telling us is our critical path. If early start equals late start, for example, I, then this is a critical path activity. We have no wiggle room or no float to delay this activity. Some people call this slack. Most people call it float though. So we have zero float. This is a critical path activity. Okay, the critical path represents the minimum amount of time required to complete a project. If you delay any activity on the critical path, it delays the project. So if we delay I 2 days, we would start on 31, but we wouldn't finish until 34. That pushes all the way through to the end, and we would finish on 65. Okay, so I always ask the class, all right, what if we do delay I? Are we guaranteed to finish late? If everything else holds true, yes. But in real life, that means we're working overtime, extra shifts. We're going to rearrange the sequence later. We're going to reduce duration somehow, and we're still going to try to get to 63. So it's not a given that you will finish late. It's just indicating that you could if you don't change anything in the future. Okay, so that's the critical path. We talked about float. Total float's the amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the project. So how many days can you delay I? 0. If you delay I, then you delay the project. So you have 0 total float here. But then if we go to N, we start to see the pattern changed a bit. And the early start was 42. The late start's 53. That means we have 11 days to play around with here before we delay the project. So if we wait 11 days to start N, we start on 53, we finish on 56, it still pushes through and we don't delay the project. So N would have 11 days of total float. O would have 11 days of total float. So the super critical, extremely difficult equation is total float equals late start minus early start. So late start minus early start. You could also do late finish minus early finish. Okay, so total float's really important. So you start to really manage anything on the critical path or anything that has low float, because L, for example, has low float. If I ignore L, it becomes critical path in a heartbeat. So if I delay this 2 days, it's now critical path, or 1 day is critical path. So 1 day of float is something I would manage quite closely. D, on the other hand, I've got 53 days to mess around with D. D is landscaping. So you start to analyze, well, I could do it on day 1, but boy, that doesn't make sense. I'm just going to destroy my landscaping. So even though I have 53 days of float, I'm probably not going to do it early. I'm probably going to push it towards the end and eat up the float. So there's a saying out there, who owns the float? And usually whoever gets to it first. So if the landscaper says, you know what, I can't be here till day 50, well, let's change that. If the landscaper says I can't be here till day 40, then the GC might say, okay, that sounds okay. So they'll start on 40, end on 48, and that is okay. So whoever asks to take the float first usually wins. But if they came in and said, I want to start on day 50, like I first started saying, they would finish on day 58, and that would... But if they came in and said they wanted to start on day 60, then they would finish on 68, and that would delay the project. So they would not be allowed to take the float in that example. Okay, free float. Free float is something we don't see that often, but occasionally you do. So it's the amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the next activity. So in this case, N, can we delay N any amount of time without delaying O? The answer is no, we cannot. So it has total float. It won't delay the project. But if we delay N, it delays O. And the reason we consider this is, let's say O is scheduled to be here on day 45. Then N is delayed because it has total float. We think, what's the big deal? Let's delay N. Then O says to us, oops, I can't show up late. I thought you were going to have me start on day 45. Now you're pushing me. I've got all these other jobs to do. I can't show up on any other day but 45. So understanding how float impacts other activities is also important. Even though we delay N, it does not delay the project. It delays O, and that impacts another contractor perhaps. Okay, the equation for this would be, if we're looking at L, for example, so if we want the free float of L, then we look at the early start of the next activity and subtract the early finish of this activity. So there's 0 days of free float in this case. Okay? I'm sorry. So then we would look at the early start of the next activity, subtract the early finish of this one, and we have 1 day of free float. We can delay L 1 day before we delay M. N, for example, 45 minus 45 is 0. We have 0 days of free float. Okay, so that's the down and dirty, really quick scheduling by hand example. Okay, I highly recommend you try it on your own and not just rely on the video. Okay, you'll also get practice in your homework. All right, again, let us know if you have any questions.